So UPB, for those who don't know, is Universally Preferable Behavior. It's my rational proof of secular ethics, and I wrote it, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and there have been, I guess, a fairly countless number of people who've tried to challenge it in this show and have not succeeded, and so I think it's holding firm pretty well.
It's healthy to be skeptical about what standard UPB was supposedly held up by. Stefan has been known to shun and ignore critics of UPB, so how could we really know if it holds up well? As an example of this shunning and disregard, take a look at this article. I'll throw the link in the description. But to sum it up briefly, an intelligent philosophy student challenged UPB when the book first came out, and Stefan completely ignored his critiques, dismissing the student as a whole because he just wasn't being nice enough, even though the evidence from the article seems to suggest that he was plenty respectful towards Stefan as a person, just critical of his ideas.
It's way too dangerous to take instruction from people, even if they're completely right. It is way too dangerous to take instruction from people who aren't empathetic, kind, and considerate. And that doesn't mean that you never get into conflicts, but it's treated, respectfully and decently, right? So if people are kind of condescending and I say, I really experienced that kind of negatively, and blah, 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 and they're like, who cares, right? Then I'm like, okay, so you don't care about me. You don't care about my thoughts. You don't care about my feelings. You don't care about... So if you don't care about me, but you want to lecture me, then what do you know about truth and wisdom?
When Stefan is confronted with criticism, he uses personal attacks and dismisses the critics as persons, and then claims victory over UPB, quote, holding up well.
I'm a big fan of personal attacks. I think that they can be very helpful, and basically every arse clown in the universe who acts like a complete dipshite to the world as a whole says, you can't attack me, you can only question my theories. And then they make their theories as impenetrable and incomprehensible as possible, and then dance around claiming victory. It's sort of like playing chess with a pigeon. You can't win because the pigeon will just knock all the pieces of a crap on the board and declare himself the winner.
Unlike Stefan, I will briefly take a look at his theory instead of him as a person to determine the validity or invalidity thereof. However, I won't spend a lot of time on the validity of the theory itself. Stefan's central case relies on the categorization of behaviors. He categorizes violence as the only activity that can be good or evil. In fact, such an activity must always be either good or evil, and everything else is aesthetics or personal preference. If you're willing to accept this categorization of behaviors, then sure, his application of this set of categories is valid. Take murder, for example.
If murder is morally good, then clearly refraining from murder is immoral. If murder were morally good, then it would also be the case that a man stranded on a desert island would be morally evil for as long as he lived there, since he would have no victims to kill. A man in a coma would also be evil, as would a sleeping man or a man on the operating table. A torturer would be an evil man as long as he continued to torture, but then would become a good man in the moment that his victim died at his hand.
He clearly makes the case that since violence can only be categorized as good or evil, and since they always must be categorized as either good or evil, the only logical conclusion is that murder is evil, and the same follows for rape, assault, etc. However, the theory makes no substantial case as to why we should accept his categorization in the first place. If this were not many years ago, I could easily feel inclined to put sexual behavior in the good or evil categories. I could draw a conclusion as follows.
The second test. Gay butt sex. If gay butt sex is morally good, then clearly refraining from gay butt sex is immoral. If gay butt sex were morally good, then it would also be the case that a man stranded on a desert island would be morally evil for as long as he lived there, since he would have no victims to ejaculate into. A man in a coma would also be evil, as he would a sleeping man or a man on the operating table. A torturer would be an evil man as long as he continued to torture, but then would become a good man in the moment that his victim was plunged with semen.
As was easily demonstrable, I could place any activity in the category of good or evil and prove basically anything to be evil, under the premise that the opposite of good is evil. Eating a sandwich cannot be done 24/7 or in a coma, and therefore it must be evil. Go ahead and try it with anything you'd like. UPB is nothing more than a subjective categorization of behaviors.
Have you ever heard of a philosopher by the name of Max Stirner?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is basically my inspiration for this position. Basically, the position that, uh, well, morality, it can exist. You don't have to deny it. You don't have to deny truth. You don't have to deny morality exists. But the question is, what do you do when presented with it? And Max Stirner would say, don't do anything if doing so harms your self-interest, because why?
Yeah, I mean, basically that is a set of ethics that a fucking amoeba could follow.
Stefan was just presented with a crucial question in ethical philosophy. Why should I be moral? This should be the obvious question after establishing whether or not a set of ethics is valid. We may deduce that the UPB is valid, which I don't think it is, but if there is no reason that I or anyone else should follow it, it has no effect on the empirical world. Because UPB concerns behavior, its validity must contain a reason for people to behave in that fashion in order for it to be relevant to reality. Stefan's first response to this extremely crucial question is, an amoeba could follow that. The first obvious flaw with this comment, of course, is that an amoeba having the capacity to follow a set of ethics does not debunk the framework. As Stefan likes to so often say, that's not an argument. An amoeba could also follow the non-aggression principle by the same standards. However, the bigger flaw is that Stefan says set of ethics. The caller is clearly not referring to another set of ethics, rather he is questioning why he should adhere to any set of ethics in the first place.
So excuse me if I think that Max Stirner should have been slightly sterner with his own rigor. And look, I mean, whether he states it with more elegance or more rigor than that, I don't know. I'm just sort of going by what you're saying.
This is clearly not an argument and avoids the question altogether. But I thought I'd throw in Max Stirner's words here to demonstrate just how eloquent he was. From his book The Ego and His Own, he comments on our obligation to one another as follows. Quote, "Where the world comes in my way, and it comes in my way everywhere, I consume it to quiet the hunger of my egoism. For me, you are nothing but my food, even as I, too, am fed upon and turned to, used by you. We have only one relation to each other, that of usableness, of utility, of use. We owe each other nothing. For what I seem to owe you, I owe at most to myself. If I show you a cheery air in order to cheer you likewise, then your cheeriness is of consequence to me, and my air serves my wish. To 1,000 others whom I do not aim to cheer, I do not show it." End quote. Obviously, the caller was not going to call in speaking in such a fashion, and I think he summed up the position pretty well, very quickly, in plain English that everyone listening could understand.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hang on. So is your question is why should people accept and follow universally preferable behavior?
Yes.
Okay, but you understand that has nothing to do with the validity of the theory.
No frickin' kidding. That's his entire point. This is about 11 minutes into the video, so this caller has been repeating the same thing for 10 minutes, and at this point, Stefan finally has to confront the argument being presented, and he comes back with, yeah, but that has nothing to do with the validity. Yep, like the caller said from the very beginning, and kept repeating throughout the discussion.
Right?
No, yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to dispute the validity of the theory. I just wanted to ask why people should change their actions based on the theory.
But you see, I wouldn't have any interest, and I'm not speaking about you directly, I would have no interest whatsoever in discussing philosophy and ethics with someone who had no preference for truth. Right? So the reason that people should follow and accept UPB is because it's true.
The UPB can only be true in terms of its categorization of good and evil. According to the way Stefan categorizes these items, sure, it's true. However, this does not provide a reason to act in accordance to what UPB classifies as good. Besides from being able to be called a good boy by Free Domain Radio people, what motivation do I have to follow UPB? Also, notice, he says here that truth is a, quote, preference, end quote. He goes on to say that UPB should be followed because it's true. In other words, he has just admitted that UPB is a personal preference and thus does not apply universally.
Because it's valid, because it's objective, because it's universal, and because it cracks the ancient dinosaur egg of what is virtue without appeals to gods, without appeals to governments and prisons and so on.
Stefan goes on throughout the next hour providing no logical answer to the question, why should I be moral? He responds to the question throughout the discussion by bringing up situations that spark emotionally negative responses from anyone who's mentally healthy. He attempts to make the case that without morality, everything would go to chaos and child rapists would run amok. This is analogous to a statist responding to the question, why should the government be an established entity? With the question-formed arguments about, well, who will protect the children? These consequentialist arguments are what Stefan so often rails against, claiming it all doesn't matter.
Governments are illegitimate morally and, frankly, unpractical economically. So people say, well, how will poor kids be educated? And who will build the roads? And how will there be national defense? And how will children be protected? And blah, 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 blah. And I'm sad to say that these questions don't matter at all. Completely irrelevant to the fundamental question. I know that may sound shocking because we're just so used to social engineering that the idea that you have to have a way of answering these questions, which of course are impossible to answer anyway, but doesn't matter. And the analogy is, it's like if I come up to you in the 17th century and say, we should abolish slavery, and then you say to me, well, how will the cotton be picked if there are no slaves?
Yet, this is exactly the strategy he employs here. Having spent his time focusing on what is moral, when finally confronted with the question, why should one be moral, he stumbles and uses tactics who he himself must realize at some level are completely fallacious.
No. No, you are not a moralist. You are not a philosopher. You have negative emotional reactions in the same way, frankly, that Hitler had negative emotional reactions to Jews and called his Holocaust self-defense. So let's say that you knew someone and you found out that that person was a serial raper of children.
Uh-huh.
You know, he had the windowless van, he had the free candy sign, and he would rape children. Talking about philosophy here, not your feelings, right?
Okay.
What has your emotional state been during this conversation?
My emotional state? Well, kind of excited actually. I got a bit of adrenaline. It's good.
Because you seem to me to have no particular emotional depth in this conversation. Your study of ethics has led you to a place where you can't even call someone morally wrong for raping children. Does this trouble you at all, or do you think that's fine?
Stefan fails at every level to give any sort of logical reason as to why one should be moral. In doing so, he has demonstrated that UPB does not correspond to real-life human behavior. From here, we can conclude that UPB is a useless framework of ethics, not only because it's invalid, but because its validity or invalidity has no effect on the empirical world. Thank you so much for watching the video. Make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, share the video before FDR files a DMCA claim with it, and leave your opinion in the comments. Do you have any arguments for Stefan or against, or let me know what you think. Thanks a lot for watching.